In the dark of the forest. Chapter 1. The wrong way. The golden light of the late afternoon penetrated between the trees, dyeing the forest floor with irregular shadows. Anna and Ricardo walked side by side, their heavy backpacks on their shoulders and panting breathing. The silence of the forest was only broken by the occasional crackling of the branches under his feet and the distant corner of some night bird. They were tired but optimistic. The plan was simple: a quick trail through the park before dusk and back to the car. Nothing that the two experienced adventurers could not deal with. But at some point something went wrong. "Are you sure this is the right way?" asked Anna, looking around with an expression of doubt. Ricardo frowned as he looked at the map in his hands. The path that once seemed well marked now became confused, with several unexpected bifurcations and trails that didn't beat what he saw on paper. "I think..." He paused, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. "Maybe we had the wrong trail behind. But if we continue here, we should find our way back." The sun was beginning to disappear quickly on the horizon, and the twilight turned the forest into a place of deep shadows. The cold wind passed through the trees, bringing with it an almost oppressive silence. Something was different. Anna looked around, squeezing her arms around her body, trying to protect herself from the cold that was beginning to wrap the place. She heard something. A subtle, almost imperceptible sound, like the crack of branches, but distant enough not to be alarming. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice low, as if she didn't want to draw attention. Ricardo stopped for a moment, the tense body listening. The silence followed. "Maybe it was just the wind." "It must be an animal," he said, trying to sound carefree. "We're in the middle of the forest after all." But Anna's feeling did not disappear. She could feel a slight tension in the air, something that made her hair on her neck shiver. They continued to walk, but the feeling of being observed grew with each step. Suddenly a louder sound broke the silence. Branches breaking, this time closer. Anna stopped abruptly, the heart fired. That was not the wind, Ricardo. He looked back, also stopping. The darkness was already dominating the environment, and the feeling of being followed became undeniable. "Let's go on just a little more," he said, though his voice was lower, almost a whisper. What they didn't know was that something or someone was watching them from the beginning. Are you enjoying the story? Subscribe and share to see the surprising unfolding of the next chapters. Chapter 2. The Whisper in the Darkness. Twilight finally gave way to complete darkness, and the forest around seemed to close on them. With Ricardo's flashlight on, small beams of light cut the darkness, but seemed unable to penetrate the vastness of the forest. Silence was absolute except for its own steps, but now there was something more in the air, something heavy, loaded with an invisible presence. "We can't continue here, Ricardo," Anna whispered, holding his arm. "It's very dark. We should have returned before." Ricardo agreed silently but did not want to admit it. They were lost, and he knew that whatever was outside followed them. With each step, the sound of rustling leaves, of branches being broken with a deliberate weight, was closer. But whenever Ricardo pointed the flashlight behind, nothing. Only the black vastness of the forest. "Let's try to accelerate," he said, trying to keep calm. "There must be some point of reference right ahead, perhaps a river or a clearing. If we find this, we can guide ourselves." But Anna no longer believed it. She felt the forest around her like a living being, pulsating, breathing. And now he seemed to be squeezing his claws around them. "Ricardo, wait!" She stopped suddenly, turning to the darkness behind them. "I'm sure I heard something. Closer this time." He pointed the flashlight once more, but the beam of light found only the density of the trees. However, there was something out of place. The trees, once silent and immovable, seemed different. A shadow moved subtly through them. "Anna, keep walking now," he said with a firmer tone, fear starting to take over. But before they could take another step, a low and guttural sound, like a distorted whisper, filled the air. It was not human. It was not animal. Something called them from the deepest shadows of the forest. Anna froze. His wide eyes, his heart beating frantically against his chest. Whatever was there was close. Very close. Ricardo took his hand tightly, pulling her to continue. But they both knew that deep down whatever hunting them would not let them go out alive. The tension is just beginning. Want to know what happens next? Subscribe and share to follow this story to the end. Chapter 3. The Clearing. At the stumbles, Anna and Ricardo accelerated the step down the trail, their eyes attentive to any sign of an exit. Ricardo's flashlight oscillated with the movements, throwing grotesque shadows into the surrounding trees. The fear that was once subtle now dominated both, pushing them forward. They ran aimlessly, without direction, just hoping to find something that would take them out of that suffocating darkness. After a few minutes, which seemed eternity, the two suddenly left in a clearing. The open space was small, but enough to provide a breath of the dense forest around. The moonlight was badly illuminated the place, but there was a sense of relief because they were out of the oppressive confinement of the trees. "Finally!" exclaimed Anna, panting, putting her hands on her knees as she tried to recover her breath. "What do we do now?" Ricardo looked around, his mind spinning, looking for a solution. He knew that stopping was not an option. Whatever she was behind them was still there in the shadows, waiting. His eyes traveled the clearing perimeter until he saw something in the distance, almost camouflaged by vegetation. An old, small, decrepit construction that looked more like an abandoned cabin. "Look there," he said, pointing. "Maybe we can get in that cabin for now." Anna followed his gaze, and although the idea of entering such a sinister place was not exactly comforting, the alternative, being exposed to what hunted them, seemed even worse. With a nod, the two went to the construction, quickly crossing the clearing. The cabin door ranged loudly when Ricardo pushed her. The interior was covered with dust and mold, with old and deteriorated furniture scattered throughout the small space. A broken window in the background allowed the weak light of the moon to enter, creating shadows that dragged on the walls. "This will have to serve," he said, locking the door with a rusty lock. "At least we are sheltered for now." Anna sat on the floor, shaking not only cold but pure terror. She could barely believe that a few hours ago they were planning a simple walk through the forest. Now they were arrested, being hunted by something they couldn't see, but they certainly wanted them killed them. "What do you think it's?" she asked, her voice shaking. "An animal? A person?" Ricardo hesitated. He didn't know what to answer. Something in the behavior of that follower seemed different. It was not a common forest predator, let alone a lost person like them. It was something he couldn't explain, but he deeply felt it was dangerous. "I don't know," he said without looking at her. "But no matter what it is, we need to get out of here, Dawn, and fast." The night deepened, and the silence inside the cabin became almost unbearable. Anna and Ricardo tried to stay awake, attentive to any noise outside. Then, in the middle of the night, the sound came. Something soft, like a rustle of leaves, but with a calculated rhythm, as if someone was walking in circles around the cabin. Anna looked at Ricardo with wide eyes. He squeezed the flashlight hard, with no courage to point her to the window. The sound stopped for a moment, and then the most terrifying of everything happened. A light knock on the door. 3 slow and calculated touches, as if that knew exactly where they were. The air inside the cabin was cold, the fear was palpable. No one dared to move. "Do you want to know what is knocking on the door? Continue to us and share this story so as not to lose the next chapter's exciting." Chapter 4. The Siege. The sound of the beating on the door echoed in Anna's mind. Each touch seemed to reverberate in her body like an electric shock. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the sound itself. Ricardo was holding the flashlight so hard that his hands trembled. They knew something was out there, and now I was trying to get in. "Let's not open this door," Ricardo whispered, his low voice as if he was afraid of being heard. Anna nodded frantically. Her heart was accelerated, and she struggled to control her breathing. Whatever it was too close, and it seemed patient. Suddenly a sharp noise broke the silence. Blast! The window. Anna turned in time to see a dark shadow move outside the broken cabin window. She arrested her breath but failed to look away. That was circulating the cabin, watching, waiting for a weak point. "Ricardo, the window?" she whispered, her voice failing. He looked quickly to the broken window. The frame was cracked, and there was nothing that could prevent the entry of something or someone. Without thinking twice, Ricardo ran to the door, pushing an old table to block the entrance. He knew that if they wanted to survive until dawn, they had to gain time. "Will you hold?" Anna asked, watching nervously as he tried to fortify the place. "Not for a long time," Ricardo admitted, panting. "But it's the best we can do now." Outside, the sound of slow, calculated steps started again. The follower continued his siege, walking around the cabin, testing every corner, every possible entry. Sometimes I stopped for long moments as if hearing, feeling their fear. Then the steps resumed. Anna covered her face with her hands, trying to stay calm. The feeling of being trapped, of nowhere to run away, was suffocating. "What are we going to do if this comes in?" she asked, her embargoed voice. Ricardo did not answer. He didn't have an answer. All they could do was wait, with fear corroding every second. Did you like it? Subscribe and share so as not to lose the outcome of this chilling story. The chat said. Chapter 5. The Revelation. The dawn slowly advanced, with the sound of the circular steps around the cabin becoming increasingly unbearable. Anna and Ricardo were on the edge of the collapse, every tense nerve as if they were about to break. The sound of the thing outside, sometimes distant, sometimes too close, it seemed a constant reminder that their time was running out. Suddenly the silence. Anna and Ricardo arrested their breath, exchanging scared looks. Whatever was out there had stopped. But unlike before, silence did not bring relief. Instead, it was heavy, suffocating, like calm before a storm. "It's too quiet," Anna whispered, her bad voice. Ricardo approached the broken window, moving carefully, trying to spy out without being seen. Everything was still. The trees shook gently in the wind, and the clearing in front of the cabin was empty. No sound, no movement. Just the night. For a moment, Ricardo felt hope. Maybe that had given up. Maybe it was just your imagination preaching pieces, fear amplifying each sound in the darkness. He returned to the center of the cabin and sat next to Anna, trying to give her a reassuring smile. "I think it left," he said with a sigh with relief. But as soon as the words left his mouth, a different sound filled the air. It was a whisper, smooth and low but unmistakable. It didn't come from outside but from inside the cabin. Anna was petrified. His fixed gaze in Ricardo as the color slowly disappeared from his face. "Did you hear that?" she asked, almost without moving her lips. Ricardo suddenly got up, his eyes walking through the small space around them. There was no one there. But the whisper continued, increasingly clear, as if someone was murmuring straight into his ears, but from an invisible place. "It makes no sense," Ricardo muttered as he took the flashlight once more, illuminating the corners of the cabin. "There is no one here." Suddenly Anna felt something cold touch her skin. A shiver ran through his whole body, as if his own air inside the cabin had become. She got up from a jump, fear growing uncontrollably. "We're not alone," he whispered, looking around, desperate to find the origin of that macabre whisper. And that was when Ricardo saw an indistinct figure, almost a shadow, made up of something that didn't look like flesh and bone, but an entity. The thing was in the darkest corner of the cabin, a hazy silhouette, the eyes, or what would be eyes, shining with a weak, evil light. Anna turned at the same time and released a suffocated scream. The thing moved without definite form, but his advance was clear. Ricardo grabbed Anna's arm, pulling her to the exit, but the table that blocked the door made the escape difficult. "The table!" shouted Anna, the voice taken by the panic. Ricardo pushed the table tightly, fighting the adrenaline that took his body. Behind them, the entity seemed to expand. The shadows around her shook like flames, swallowing the low light left inside the cabin. With one last push, Ricardo paved the way for the exit. They ran out, stumbled on the high ground of the clearing. They didn't dare look back. All they could do was run. The tall trees now seemed less threatening than what followed them. Are you feeling intrigued? Keep following and share so as not to lose the outcome of this electrifying story. Chapter 6. The Last Race. The cold air of dawn whipped his faces as they ran through the forest, without direction, guided only by the desperation of escaping. Terror had turned each step into a struggle for survival. The sound of something unnameable was still behind them, no longer visible, but still there, like a dark presence that dragged on between the trees. Ricardo pulled Anna by the arm, the heart fired. The tiredness was beginning to take care of both, but stopping was not an option. The forest seemed to turn as they ran, the paths becoming indistinguishable, the denser trees as if they were trying to keep them trapped. "We're running in circles," shouted Anna between gaps. "We have no way out." But Ricardo did not answer. He knew she was right, but the dread of facing what followed them was greater than logic. All they could do was continue, waiting for a miracle, or a clearing that would take them back to the safe and normal world. So finally something changed. They spotted a flash of light in the distance, something that did not seem natural to that oppressive darkness. It was a weak but constant light, coming from something that looked like a larger construction, perhaps a house or a shelter. "There," Ricardo pointed out with renewed hope. Without thinking twice, they ran toward light. The way was difficult, full of roots that threatened to knock them down with each step, but the idea of escaping propelled them. When they finally arrived, the vision left them speechless. It was a apparently abandoned country house, but with lit lights. The windows were covered by old and faded curtains, and the outside was in ruins. But it offered security, or at least it seemed. "We come in?" Anna asked hesitantly. His body trembled, not just cold. "Do we have another choice?" Ricardo replied, opening the door without hesitation. The interior was as old and dusty as the outside, but different from the previous cabin. This house seemed to have been inhabited recently. There were signs of life, dishes on the table, an erased fireplace, but still with fresh ashes. It was as if someone had left in a hurry. The two entered, closing the door behind them. For a brief moment, the silence was all they heard. The sound of the hearts themselves pulsating even stronger in their ears. "Are we saved?" Anna muttered, looking around. Before Ricardo could answer, a disturbing noise echoed around the house. A slow stalk, like the door ranging somewhere inside. Something awaited them, and this time they had nowhere to run. Curious to know the end of this chilling story? Subscribe and share to ensure that you won't lose the surprising outcome. The end. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel, like and comment on the story.